And Congressman Chris Gibson is here with us now. Thanks for being here. We appreciate it.
Tom, thanks for the opportunity.
As we just heard, you're exploring a possible run for governor in 2018. There has been a lot of speculation since you announced a year ago now that you weren't going to run again for Congress. But why now? Why this early? We're still a good 2.5 years away from the election.
Well, Governor Cuomo's reelection has started quite a while back. He's got $16 million in his war chest right now. And, I'm a big believer in a reality-based assessment. It comes out of my experience in the military. And when you examine the fact that the enrollment in New York State 2-to-1 favors Democrats, and the fact that the governor already has a $16 million head start, I think it's just prudent that, if we're going to look at this very seriously, we have to start raising the money now.
A lot of people would look at that and say that's a daunting challenge.
It is.
He's a two-term governor, as you mentioned, $16 million in the bank, ready to run, and a state that is heavily leaning to the blue. So what do you do to win as a statewide Republican?
Well, while it is challenging, I do believe that there is a path. I hear all over the state. I've now been in 43 counties and counting of the 62, and I hear, regardless of party, a real desire for new leadership that unites the state, that helps us reach our potential when it comes to the economy, cleans up Albany, that provides a new direction in education, and allows us to see more safety and security in our communities in a manner that's also consistent with our freedoms and our Bill of Rights. I think all of those things are possible.
So you're touching on a few of the topics I was going to ask you about. So if you had to do up a list right now of reasons that you're running for governor, what would top the list?
Well, I feel it is a calling, a calling to provide leadership at a time that the state really needs leadership. So, whether it be about the economy, but also about restoring faith. This is a government of the people, by the people, for the people. And the fact that there are too many New Yorkers right now that think, well, that corruption, we can't do anything about it. Of course we can. This is a great state, nearly 20 million people in the state. If we put our mind to that, we can absolutely clean it up. What we need is leadership by example, though. We need a governor who will go first. I'm a big believer in that we were never meant to have a permanent political class, that we were meant to have citizen legislators. So, I felt so strongly about it, I self-imposed term limits. I'm going to follow through on that. I also think that our governor's position should be term limited. So assuming I go through, and I'll make a final decision at the end of the year, but if I go forward with this, I am going to self-impose term limits again. I'm going to say that I'll do 2 terms, 4 years each, and I think that's important really to get started on this, but there's much more that needs to be done in terms of restoring faith. The Assembly Republicans have a package, they call it the Spirit of 76. It's meant to really enhance transparency and accountability. It does provide term limits for the leadership positions. I think that's important. It also provides for what is often called regular order, which is rank and file assemblymen and women who are representing the opportunity when they hear good ideas back home, that they can come to Albany, talk to their colleagues about it, and if over half of them support that idea, then they'd at least get a hearing and a vote. Too often we hear about Albany's all about 3 men in a room. That's wrong in so many ways. Not just the gender, which is clearly wrong for that, but it's just wrong because we're meant to have, a voice in our government. And I think that we do need legislative reform. And beyond that, I think we have some issues with our campaign financing here in New York. We have unlimited giving. We don't, recognize that at first blush, but when you have a big gaping loophole for LLCs, you essentially have unlimited giving, and that needs to end. And we need independent redistricting. And we have this illusion that we pick our representatives when too often representatives pick their voters at the end of what is a backroom decision on reapportionment and redistricting. We need independent redistricting. So when you put all that package together and you have a governor who leads by example, I think you will restore faith in our ability to be self-governing. I think that's a big issue.
A couple additional ideas have been talked about, limiting outside income for lawmakers or even making the legislature full-time.
So limiting the income, I think that's something we can look at. I mean, we certainly shouldn't rush into it. We should examine that. I'm absolutely open to looking at that. To be candid with you though, Tom, it's hard to take from a guy who took a $700,000 check as an advance to a book. Where I grew up in the military, leaders lead by example. You go first. I felt very strongly that, in these challenging times that, for our family to collect 2 paychecks from the taxpayer was not right. So, even though I'd earned that pension after 29 years in the military, we voluntarily give that back to the Treasury. We give it back to you and the taxpayers so that I wouldn't double dip, leading by example. Here's the governor. He says, well, we should limit the amount of money that legislators can make on the outside, but he won't put that standard to himself. $700,000 check for an advance on a book. So, again, I think that with leadership by example, we can get the legislature to move. The history of mankind, I can tell you in combat, it's not, well, if you look at combat from a rational actor perspective, it doesn't make any sense. Why would somebody move when the bullets are flying? It could very well hit them. But if leaders get out front and go first, men and women will follow.
You mentioned the economy. Unemployment has dropped from 11% down to 5-6% here in the North Country, but the economy, especially up here, still seems to be lagging behind the rest of the state. So what do you do? How do you address it?
Well, first of all, you take a look at the current approach right now. We're watching commercials on TV. We're paying for those, by the way. These are the Startup New York and All Things Are Well here in New York. Hundreds of millions of dollars. We're paying for that with our taxpayer dollars. And you can just wonder, why is the governor doing that? I mean, we can assume that he's probably concerned about the last Siena poll that said that his, the dissatisfaction with his job approval was 58%. Well, here's an idea. How about stop running those commercials, lower our taxes, and I'll bet his job approval will go up. We're the last in the nation when it comes to tax burden. Study came out last week. We're 50th out of 50 when it comes to local and state tax burden. That's got to change. I mean, if we're going to be competitive regionally and across the country, we're going to have to change the underlying business environment. That means lower taxes. It also means changing the orientation of the regulatory state. We absolutely know we need a regulatory state for justice and for health and safety. But too often when I meet with small business owners, and I meet with them all the time, they tell me a story. If I hear it once, I heard it 1,000 times. Regulators will come in. It's a very unpleasant circumstance. And by the end of it, they leave with a fine. In some cases, a pretty hefty fine. When I was a brigade commander, I was responsible for, overseeing inspections of my subordinate units, including my companies. The brigade's about 4,000, a company, maybe 130 or so. So my staff was empowered. It made life in a company potentially very challenging. But before my inspectors went down to the company, I told them, I said, remember, anything you find a deficiency in that company is my deficiency too. I command this outfit. Any shortcoming is my shortcoming. So, I said, look, we're going to hold them to the standard, but here's the way to go. We're there to assist them to get to the standard, identify it, and then, mentor them on how to get to the standard, and then we'd return again in 90 days to see that they had complied. The point is, that's not the way the regulators work here. We've got issues at the federal level, too, that I'm working on, but the federal and state regulators will show up. It's a fine at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. Here's a better approach. Why don't we visit, help them, mentor them, and then come back again, and if they've complied, no fine. So between lowering the tax burden, changing the regulatory process, I can tell you that we will grow.
What about the $15 minimum wage? Too much too soon?
Well, look, I do think that is so, but let me explain why. I grew up in a working class family. My dad was a mechanic in the building trades, and no one in my family had ever gone to college. So I feel very strong connection and empathy for all those, for those in the building trades, those in working class families. Nothing would make me happier than if they were making a very flourishing wage. Here's the issue, though. When you look at such a jump in the minimum wage, the studies show we're going to lose up to 200,000 jobs. And I think that what we should do instead is, first of all, we just went to $9 last month. I think what we should do is depoliticize this issue. Right now, we should link it to inflation so that it does go up based on inflation, but not this jump from $9 to 15. And then, if you have areas of the state, like New York City, for example, where that doesn't seem to make sense given the cost of living, I think if we have a governor with the right judgment and temperament to understand in moments when we have regional differences, well, we can allow for some regional autonomy there in New York City. But to use that standard and put it on all of upstate New York, our mom and pop, our small businesses, they're not going to be able to make it. Those are the jobs we're going to lose. And when we lose those jobs, that hurts the tax base in already stretched rural areas. I think what we should link it to inflation, which studies show that we can endure. if it goes from 9 to 920, next year, that kind of movement, we can actually, demand signal is actually inelastic. But when you make such a quantum change, you're going to have some issues as far as impact on the economy. What we should do, though, is once we link it to inflation and allow for some regional autonomy, then we should quickly pivot to pro-growth policies. Because when we're growing the economy, free market forces will force wages to go up naturally.
A number of small businesses worry that it's going to hurt them
Yeah.
dramatically. We hear some businesses, especially here in the North Country, talking about maybe packing up and leaving. Airbrake over near Watertown, maybe taking 500 jobs. Do you think if it follows through and goes to $15 an hour for everyone in New York, that you would see companies pulling up stakes and taking jobs and going to other states where the minimum wage is much lower?
Yeah, it's going to be a problem for us. All studies indicate we're going to lose jobs. The studies I've looked at are over 200,000 jobs. That is absolutely the wrong direction right now. I think what we need to do is have flourishing economy where you see wages, naturally rising. Let me say one other thing too. Not only do I think that is potentially very adverse for our small businesses, for our upstate New York economy, but I just met with once again the disabilities community. They're very concerned about this. They're concerned about the wrong signals, especially the governor starting with fast food, and how that impacted some of those that work with developmental and intellectual disabilities. They're losing some of their workers, based on that pressures. There's also nothing in the budget to help those that are reliant on Medicaid to deal with this significant spike. They are very concerned. Already there's been, one of our organizations that deals with DD, with the developmental disabilities, has gone out of business. And, the problem is then what? What do we do if we lose these ARCs? What do we do? I don't know what we do, to be candid with you. I don't know how we make it. I think every human has a dignity, and every human should be enabled to live to their God-given potential. ARCs do this. I was just at an ARC yesterday in Broome and Tioga County, and I can tell you that it was very heartwarming. When I first came in, there was a young American that was, 2 months ago, could only say one word. Now, in the process of eating his lunch, he was able to say the whole sentence. I want cookies. And then to be able to laugh saying it, knowing everybody watching. But if you think about it, what a basic human need to be able to be understood and to communicate. That's a basic human need. And this facility, this organization, allows that to happen. And it's being imperiled by the governor's plan right now. They're very worried about
the nonprofits worried that they may not only lose their workers, but then with the higher minimum wage, they may not be able to afford as many workers or staff as they have now.
And if they go out of business, then what do we do? And I don't even know what the answer is to that. So again, very empathetic, but I do think there's a in terms of wages for workers, but I think there's a better way forward.
Education. There have been a number of reboots of Common Core.
How many, by the way? I've lost count. I think it's 3, but I'm not sure.
I think you're right. Would you look for another fix, or would you scrap it all together and start over?
What we should have done, we shouldn't have done, first of all, the fact that it was rolled out like this was absolutely a mistake. What we should do now is roll it back. We should roll back Common Core. We should go back to the New York State standards. And then what we should do is bring all the stakeholders in. We should bring the teachers, the parents, and the administrators. We should focus on what we all agree, which is we want more excellence in schools. But I think the best way to do that is through empowerment, not through centralization and top-down. We just enacted, Lee Stefanik helped us with this, we enacted a very important federal piece of legislation that rolls back No Child Left Behind. That's a step in the right direction, in my view, but we're still here stuck in the state. We need to roll back the Common Core, go back to the New York State standards, and then work on empowerment by means of resources. And the federal bill increased the federal investment in our local schools by 5.6%. And that's going to be, I think, helpful. But then empowerment includes both resources and flexible policies. And then as a concept, I think the best approach is actually one of mentorship and of leader development. We saw this in the military, that when you really spend the time and the energy to work with your junior leaders through instruction, through practical exercise, through feedback on the practical exercise, and allow them to redo it again, we found that our leaders grew in competence and confidence, and that translated into organizational effectiveness. That's the approach. You know, it's really tragically ironic that at a time that the governor was centralizing and demonizing teachers, he was cutting the budget for professional development. He was absolutely upside down. So he's telling us now that he's listening, but I know a lot of teachers, a lot of folks involved in education, stakeholders, they don't know how to trust this guy. And so, I don't think it's that complicated. I think we should do what I just said.
Should teacher evaluation still be tied to testing?
No.
No.
No, I think the best way that this is done is actually through mentorship and through development. Look, I led a life of accountability in the United States military. Let me assure all the viewers that. But the best way to do that is through a vision statement that unites the organization. In this case, you'll have leadership at the school level. You do have accountability because the parents in the area, I mean, you have a school board. They can run for the school board. So you have accountability there. And then, you know, that accountability with the leadership then works a chain of mentoring and counseling on professional development, and you'll see excellence in your school. That's a better way to go about business. By the way, I don't have any problem with the information, the recommendations that come out of even Washington and Albany. Here's the difference, is when you tie that to, when you make that punitive, and when you tie that to money, it takes on a whole different complexion. Here's the difference. When you're on a school board, you know, the people, whenever I meet somebody on a school board, I thank them. Because Lord knows, they get shin kicked all the time. And really, I mean, 75 to 80% of their budget is already decided before they even sit down with all these unfunded mandates. This is how I think it should be working, is that when you at the national level, when they see trends, when they gather data and they have best practices, they should share it. Share it with the local school boards, share it. You know, but there's a difference between sharing it and then mandating it. Mandating is not the right way to do it. Share the information, because those on the school board are really there for the right reason. They want it to go well, so you're empowering them with information, and then let them vote on how they're going to proceed, and then I think, you know, we'll move forward in a way that actually sees more excellence. By the way, it'll be infused more with local needs too, like the manufacturing needs that we have here. In my congressional district, we've been working on tying together the manufacturers along with the BOCES and the community colleges, so that as part of their activity to either get their certificate or degree, they're actually learning with a company that they want to get hired when they're done. So that what the company gets out of it is maybe a quarter or even a third less time required to train the new employee, because they already did it as part of their graduation requirement. So the company's happy because they're getting somebody who's vetted, somebody they trust, and somebody who's partially trained. And then the individual feels less frustration because they got a job at the end of all this, which is an issue. And they also feel meaningful instruction that's leading towards task accomplishment.
SAFE Act, would you like to see that repealed?
I do. Here's why. Look, I care deeply about the safety and security of our communities. I mean, I'm a husband and a father of three. My 3 children are in the same public school that I went to, and they're teenagers. But I just don't think that targeting law-abiding citizens is the way to make our communities more safe and more secure. What I do think we need to do is have a real in-depth look at what the sources of insecurity are. What I've derived from my research is that predominantly the source of insecurity is actually the narco-traffickers. And this is actually now, once you define this as issues of safe and secure instead of gun control, well, then you not only get the issues of gun violence, but you get knife violence, you get opiates and heroin. And I think what we need to do is, instead of targeting law-abiding citizens, we should roll that back, but we should put policy in place that actually delivers on safe and secure. So you're talking about supporting law enforcement with resources and with training, and helping law enforcement to get to better know and support their communities. This has been an issue in some of our urban areas across the country, where there's been a divide between the protectors and those they're protecting. So, you know, in my county, my sheriff won a grant to get to better know Hudson. I'm from Columbia County, and it's helping. It not only helps de-escalate potentially challenging circumstances, but you get to recruit from these communities too. So you're showing a strength in your sheriff's office. I know we got great sheriffs up here in the North Country. I got to watch them on TV with everything that happened last year. Very proud of their service. But so I think what you put in place instead of the SAFE Act is policies that crack down on gangs and narco traffickers, supports law enforcement, helps the social cohesion in your community, and you have to address mental health. Now, why? Well, you know, some of the tragic higher profile cases we've had in the country of mass shootings, Sandy Hook, Aurora, Arizona, a few years ago, Southern California. What they all had in common was an individual with psychosis who was hearing suggestive voices, suggesting them to violence. I want to be clear, most people with psychosis are not violent. But we need better policies that actually support those with, not only those with psychosis, but the families of those with psychosis. I want to say that my wife's a licensed clinical social worker, so I get the benefit of her counsel all the time, and it's awesome. And I've learned a lot from not only listening to her, but also others in the profession, which I think, again, is really important in a leader, is to be able to listen and to have a collaborative approach. And I think we have made some strides in neuroses. Here we're talking about anxiety and depression. Mm-hmm. We need to continue that. We need more support, veterans, more support, and really all people for anxiety and depression. But the issue with safe and secure centers not around anxiety and depression so much as it does this issue with some, very few, but some with psychosis, hearing voices. I'm a co-author of a bill in Washington that deals with this, that provides more federal resources to deal with that. We need more work at the state. Those policies, I'll tell you, Tom, stronger and better mental health policies and policies that support law enforcement cracking down on gangs and narco traffickers, that will actually make our communities more safe and secure, and then you can repeal the SAFE Act, because that's not helping us.
You mentioned both heroin and the breakout from Dannemora. I'll pick up on both of those. Since you just mentioned resources, let's start with heroin. What do we do if you're elected governor on a statewide basis, or in your last 9 months in Congress? What do we do about the heroin epidemic?
Yeah, we're already very active in this space in the Congress. I authored an amendment last year that increased the amount of federal resources for the federal, state, county coordination against the drug trafficking. I would tell you that it's actually three things that we have to do. First is prevention, and arguably the most important, prevention, because for this is tragic. It's impacted families and communities all over our state and our nation. But the opiates and the heroin, this is life-changing. It can be addictive right from the start, and it causes a brain injury. And the path back to wellness is long and, quite frankly, lifelong, because there's up to a month needed in terms of in-treatment care, and then 6 to 9 months in outpatient care, and then there's 12-step for the rest of their lives. So prevention, therefore, is critically important. And so I've been supportive of efforts to increase the resources and the programs. We have the DARE program. Of course, that's been around for a long time. Some people actually question the efficacy of it. Look, we've been evolving. A lot of our sheriff's officers trying to improve that, update it. I think anytime you're in school and you're talking with kids about the dangers of this and the signals and signs, it's important investment. I will tell you that in my congressional district, the former addicts that are involved in prevention are doing some of the greatest work, really meaningful work. That's number one, prevention. Before I get to enforcement, let me talk about treatment. Well, here's what I've learned in treatment. Unfortunately, it's very uneven. There are some treatment facilities that do very well. I would tell you that any treatment facility and any treatment protocol that's less than 28 days, I don't know how it works. Mm-hmm. I mean, somebody could probably show me some data, but I don't know how it works, because I've seen too many cases where there's a relapse. So I think we need more uniformity in terms of a protocol for treatment. And I'm not satisfied with the insurance company coverage right now. I think that's part of the problem. And then, so we need more sharing of best practices and better standards, I think, in place. And then enforcement, we need to go after these narco traffickers. I mean, there's too much money to be made, and they're getting away with this. And I would tell you that there's a strong correlation between that heartache and also the violence. So, there are ways we can do this, and increasing that account and the better coordination between federal, state, and local officials, and we will have these folks on the run, which is what we need to do.
And treatment. Yeah. You talked about the length of the period, getting insurance coverage for it. Does the state need to look at more treatment options? A new facility has just been approved for Schuyler Falls at an old state facility there. Are there enough locations and options for addicts to get treatment at this point?
Yeah, I don't think so. But as we build out that capacity, two things. One is, for the capacity that's there, it's so important that they be up to standard. Because if we're sending our young folks there for treatment and it's not getting it done, then we're not chipping away at the problem. So I think we need to focus on the quality right now of the protocol of the treatment regime, and work prevention. And hopefully, even as we build out, we'll need less of it.
And I know that the escape from Dannemora, we're still obviously waiting for the Inspector General's report to come out to answer a lot of questions, raise a number of issues. But do you have issues right now that you see either at Dannemora or at prisons statewide in New York that you think need addressing?
Well, I've got a lot more to learn on it, but I will tell you this, that some of the things I've seen, I don't think that the state really listened to our professionals. Our corrections officers who were talking about issues that were going on, not only at Dannemora, but in other places as well. And it appears to me that we may have been really taking shortcuts on some of these things. Again, it goes back to this concept or this approach of collaboration, just listening. I think this is really important. Look, I mean, commanding paratroopers, you definitely have to be decisive. There's no question on that. But you also have to be secure in who you are, that before you make that decision, you really have consulted widely and that you have a firm understanding of what the problem set is and what the alternatives are, the pros and cons to those alternatives before you make a decision. So, I want to see more respect shown to the profession.
Do you think there was a rush to judgment when it comes to the superintendent and a number of the people being removed from their positions?
Well, I don't know enough on that, to be honest with you, Tom. That's something I look forward to learning more about. But I do believe that there were some recommendations a priori that really fell on deaf ears.
Your 20th district used to cover a good chunk of Essex County,
Yeah.
Lake Placid, and into the Adirondacks. A controversial issue there right now, the DEC and the DOT have a proposal that would take a state-owned rail corridor, rip up 34 miles of track between Tupper Lake and Lake Placid, turn it into a multi-use recreational trail, keep the rest of the train track intact, in fact, upgrade it. Right now, there's staunch supporters on both sides of it, those who think it's a great idea for hikers, bikers, snowmobilers in the winter, bring money into the economy. Those historians and preservationists and train lovers who say tourist trains are a great thing for the Adirondacks, why not keep this rail corridor intact in one piece? Have you followed this at all, and have you taken any sort of a position on this? And do you think the state's proposal that it's considering right now that's been approved by the APA is the right one?
Well, I've only recently heard of it, so I have much more to learn on this. But I will tell you this, that I've seen this phenomenon before. I serve the 19th district now, and we have just, fortunately, we've gotten to the end of this struggle. The Catskill Mountain Railroad, which is in Ulster and can actually reach up into Delaware County. My goodness gracious, we had a big brouhaha about that same issue. Here's the good news. It's ended peacefully. They've actually found a way to reach an accommodation where everyone's happy. So, that's probably worth looking at. The folks around here can maybe look up the case of the Catskill Mountain Railroad, but they found a way to do both, to be able to have the rail. And you were putting your finger on. I mean, they're really proud of this. They did, a Polar Bear Express that really significantly spiked the sales tax. I mean, getting money into the county because people came from all over to go on that train ride. So, and then, they have preservation efforts, and this has been linked to tourism. So the train is actually able to continue to exist and flourish, and guess what? So are the trails. So this is the best of both worlds, right? So I don't know the particulars of this case, of whether or not that is possible, but, initially when that conflict erupted, that was a you got to choose type of situation too, where folks said you had to pick one side or the other, and in the end they found that they didn't need to do that. They were actually able to live together peacefully and get it all done.
Any other issues from your days in the 20th district that, as governor, you would look to tackle?
Well, I'm certainly very proud of ORDA. Very much appreciative of the tourism efforts all throughout the North Country. And look, I think the environment is something really important to all of us in this world. Certainly a resonating issue for the North Country. I'm proud to say I lead on that in the U.S. Congress, and the strongest record. And Elise Stefanik is doing great as well. But we got to support, and she does, and we both do clean energy, and making sure that this Earth is sustainable. Just as I have an inclination, I want to see us get back to a balanced budget so that future generations get the same choices and freedoms that we've had, is the same inclination why we need to protect the Earth, because we want it to be inhabitable and flourishing for all generations to come.
You mentioned Orta. Would you like to see Lake Placid possibly bid on a third Olympics? Maybe
Yes.
looking at a statewide bid with New York City and
Well,
Albany?
absolutely. When I was here serving the North Country, I was a huge fan and wanted to see us do just that. I would love to see that development.
You're just one of a handful of Republicans to acknowledge that climate change is a significant issue that needs to be addressed and a priority.
Lee Stefanik with us too, by the way.
After saying you supported doing that, at the end of last year, you did surprise some, though, when you voted for the resolution to kill the EPA's Clean Power Plan. Why did you do that?
They tacked on cap and trade, which I don't think is the smart way of doing business. I mentioned earlier in this interview, I grew up in a working class family, and I don't want to see us with $5, $6 for gallon of gas and the home heating. I mean, we just came through, fortunately, so far, a winter that the temperatures haven't been as challenging, and the home heating prices have been lower. And thanks be to God for that. I mean, I think of all our working class families, how that's like a tax cut to them, And so I believe absolutely in protecting the earth, but I believe that we can do it through our ingenuity and through our research and development. This is why I'm such a strong supporter for the development of clean energy, all clean energy. And that is a better way that we can do this. We don't have to put an onerous tax and cap, tax and trade system to do that. It's not necessary. So that's what's different, is the earlier versions that I supported didn't have the cap and trade, but the one that they put up in the latter part of the summer did. And I don't support that.
But you understand the no vote upsetting folks who look at acid rain coming from power plants from the Midwest and what it does in the
Well, I'll tell you,
Adirondacks.
we did a good job with technology. That was the key there. I mean, I totally get that. And by the way, I'm so glad that we were able to make significant progress on that. I mean, that was your scrubbers and low sulfur approaches, and we've seen a significant reduction in acid rain, and thanks be to God for that. But again, I think that technology approach is the right one for us. Not only will that protect the earth, it'll grow jobs, be good for us. And by the way, it'll also be good for our foreign policy. As somebody who spent 4 tours in the Middle East, I don't want us to be reliant on other countries for energy sources. I want to see us.
Renewable energy. Do you support more wind farms?
Yes.
There are hundreds of wind turbines already in the northern tier.
I do. I tell folks about the wind turbine. It's the new beautiful. When I was 12 years old, I didn't enjoy the coffee taste. Now I can't imagine life without it. I acquired a taste for coffee. And when it comes to wind turbines, I think about us generating power in that manner, and it's the new beautiful to me. I support solar energy as well, biomass. Right here in the North Country, we had a power plant at Fort Drum that was coal-fired, and it came down. Within a year later, it came back up, retrofitted as a biomass facility. It's providing energy for our servicemen and women and their families. It's providing jobs. It's good for the earth. So I want to see more of that, and we can do it. We absolutely can do it. There's no reason why we can't lead the world when it comes to clean energy, and it ought to start right here in the Empire State.
And goals to meet renewables, would you look across the border to Quebec and hydropower from Quebec?
Well, I'd like to see it for here. I mean, I would like to see us generate our power. I'm not anathema to bringing in, if necessary, other power, but we ought to be generating it. I think it's a great source of pride. It's a great source of jobs. It's good for the economy, good for the foreign policy, and it's also good for the environment. I want to see us creating. I see New York. There's no reason why we can't proliferate renewable energy and be an energy exporter in our state and have a significant boost to our economy in the process.
All right, last question.
Yeah.
When will you make a decision about running in 2018?
That'll be at the end of this term, which is at the end of this year. And look, we've off to a great and strong start with the exploratory committee. Building out, we got near 1,000 volunteers already, and we're raising money. If that continues, we will in fact go forward. But we do need to assess at the end of the year on how well that's going.
Great, thanks for your time.
Tom, thanks.
Appreciate it.
Great to be with you.
Good.